Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Robust Opposition. I'm very pleased to be presenting to you tonight three very special people who are candidates for a school board in their respective California communities. First, we have Mo Kashmiri, who is running for the Sacramento County School Board. Then we have Rocio Rivas, who is running for the Los Angeles City School Board. And finally, we have Mike Hutchinson, who is actually a member of the Oakland City School Board, but is running for re-election, or actually election in a different district, which we'll talk about when we get to that. But I'd like to start off by saying to the viewers that I was an education activist when I lived in Los Angeles, fighting the privatization of public education, mostly by fighting charter schools and co-locations. And I did a lot of shows with candidates and live streamed a lot of protests and things outside the school board, testified before the NAACP about how the charter school expansion has exacerbated segregation. So this is an issue that's very near and dear to my heart, which is why I'm giving airtime to these three great advocates for public education, which is the opposite of the move to privatize public education. So I want to ask each one of them to talk about their backgrounds, their personal backgrounds, where they're from, where they went to school, what jobs they've held, and how they first got interested in education. And we'll start with you, Mo.
So again, my name is Mo Kashmiri. I'm running for the Sacramento County Office of Education. My race is on June 7th, so it's coming up soon. I'm a parent of a fifth grader in the Sac City Unified School District, and I'm a longtime educational and student activist. I'm a recovering attorney. I got disillusioned, and for the last 16 years, I've helped negotiate contracts on behalf of working families. I co-founded the Sacramento City Caregivers and Parents Union together, and together we successfully stopped school closures, fought budget cuts, and saved after-school programs. The reason I got involved was because when I moved to Sacramento from Fresno 3 years ago, we actually had to do a picket just to get a permanent sixth grade teacher assigned at my school. And when they assigned it, they just took a teacher from one of the southern schools and put them in our school. So essentially, we just moved the problem around. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized how big the issues were in Sacramento. We just don't have enough teachers. We don't have enough subs. We don't have enough aides. We don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough bus drivers. We don't have enough, any of office staff. And it's really impacting the kids. And so, I tried to recruit someone else to run for this position and I wasn't successful. And so I decided, if somebody's got to do it, I'll step up and I'll do it myself if I have to. Right now is a turbulent time for Sacramento because we have they're on day 8 of a strike because of the issues around staffing are so bad right now. In fact, some of the parents actually just took over the school district office and are refusing to leave until its contract is settled so we can get our kids back to school. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, you answered my next question in that question, which is why you decided to run. So I'm going to fold that into the first question, Rocio. Again, what is your background, personal, educational, professional? How did you get involved in education and why did you decide to run?
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everyone. So Rocio Rivas. I am a graduate of LAUSD. My son is an LAUSD student. I thrived in LAUSD schools. I went on to get a BA from UC Berkeley in Development Studies and Political Science with a minor in African American Studies. And it was at Berkeley that I became that I knew that public education was going to be part of my life's purpose. I took a class on education with Professor Pedro Noguera when he was at Berkeley in the early 90s. And I also had an opportunity to be a teacher assistant at a bilingual preschool in Berkeley. And it was there that I saw the beauty of young children, learning Spanish together and English, and just the beautiful diversity that I saw at this school, that I said, this is the vision that I see all of our schools, is this beautiful multicultural, language based school that I wanted to see somehow how it's being implemented throughout our district. And I became so much in love. With public education. I wanted to be a teacher, but I also liked research. I wanted to know more. So I went on to New York, and I went to get a master's in comparative and international education from Teachers College, Columbia University. And I went on to get my doctorate as well from Columbia University in comparative and international education. And it was here that I received my training as a researcher, as a policy analyst, a program evaluation. And so I traveled throughout the world, from Bolivia to the Republic of Georgia. I went to Chile and Argentina, looking at global political public policies, and then I realized they were so connected to the privatization of public education. And so I did my dissertation with a comparative study in 2 states in Mexico. And I looked and I analyzed how a neoliberal policy was intended to provide more democracy and social participation in Mexico. So I said, well, that's interesting. Democracy in Mexico. Let me see how this has changed. And what I learned from my dissertation was that when these decentralization and neoliberal policies, what they're really aiming for is privatization of public education. And I learned this firsthand at UC, a teacher's college, when I took a course in a new center that they opened, which was the Center for the Privatization of Public Education. And this is when my antennas went up and my red flag went up, and I was like, I need to know what this agenda is in the privatization. And needless to say, this has brought me to run for for the Board of Education to stop the privatization agenda. And I have experience in policy analysis. I'm currently working for board member Jackie Goldberg as her policy and research analyst. And I have been working on that fight with her. And I want to continue doing that, but as a board member, to continue fighting privatization. That's pretty much my history in a nutshell.
Wow, that's great. Well, you might know that I had Jackie Goldberg on my show, and she is a legend. So good for you working with her. Okay, Mike, your turn.
Great, thank you. I'm still getting back into the election stream here. So first, thank you for having me on again, Lauren. And it's an honor and a privilege to be sitting here with other folks running for school board across California, largely based on the same issues. So for myself, I'm a proud graduate of Oakland Public Schools. Both of my parents were educators in the community. My mom was a kindergarten teacher for 40 years, and my dad worked at our local junior colleges for over 20 years. And for me, I worked directly with youth, never as a classroom teacher, but providing extra pull-out services, PE programs, after-school programs for over 20 years in Oakland and the East Bay, until 2012, when the 2 schools that I had worked at for 10 years, Maxwell Park Elementary and Santa Fe Elementary, were slated for closure and eventually closed. And during that year here in Oakland, we had a series of protests against these mass school closures and began to organize really for the first time around these issues. When our schools closed at the end of that school year, I decided that I was going to have to do something to continue the fight for quality public schools in every neighborhood. And I left working directly with youth and students and wound up getting into organizing around these issues. And we formed an organization here in Oakland, Oakland Public Education Network, and became founding members of the Journey for Justice Alliance. Also during this period, over the last 10 years, I actually ran for school board 3 times, culminating and finally winning in 2020. And combined in those 3 elections for here in Oakland School Board District 5, I had over $1 million spent against me by billionaires across the country that many of us are familiar with. So even Michael Bloomberg was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars directly against me in my local election. And when I ran in 2020 and was elected, I ran explicitly on a platform to end school closures and end the financial mismanagement, to really check privatization and bring back community control and make our focus a quality public school in every neighborhood. And so it's exciting. It's not exciting having to run again this soon, but it's really exciting getting back into this campaign and really seeing how many more candidates there are starting to be across California fighting for these same issues. And so for our three cities here, LA, Sacramento, and Oakland, although we each have a unique story, we've really been impacted by these same forces over the last 20 years with privatization and neoliberal policies. And hopefully with new leadership getting elected, we can really turn a corner on this and bring a focus back to quality community-controlled schools in every neighborhood.
Absolutely. And just for people who don't know, some of these billionaires, one of them just passed away. He was our liberal billionaire, as he's called, Eli Broad in Los Angeles, who was especially insidious. He had a foundation, he had a superintendent's academy, he had a plan to get 50% of LAUSD school students in charters. Already there's 20% in charters, and the district is losing $500,000 a year to charter schools. It's 500,000 or 500 million. I'm so bad with numbers.
Million.
500 million, yeah. Okay, yeah, because 500,000 didn't sound very much. So yeah, 500, that's very significant, to the budget. As big as it is, that's still a lot of money. So the other reason they fight it is they get a 39% tax credit. It's called the, what's it called, that tax credit? When they invest in an inner city neighborhood, which they can do by investing in a charter school, and if that charter school is still up and running in 7 years, they can literally deduct or get 39% of the taxes they paid back. So that's why they're doing it, these billionaires, not because they care so much for the children. A lot of people don't know that. But, Bloomberg is one, and Steve Jobs' widow, Lorraine Jobs is one, and the Koch brothers on the right-wing side of things, one of them just died. Anyway, let's talk about now what accomplishments you are most proud of that you have achieved for education, not being on the board for Mo and Rocio and being on the board for Mike, or maybe even something that you did before you joined the board. Let's, again, start with you, Mo. And you got to unmute.
Yes. So for me, at our school, one of the biggest achievements for me was when I was in Fresno, we were able to kick out one of the Broad superintendents. His name was Michael Hutchinson. And he was one of those neoliberal folks that believed we should just cut, and we could still have quality schools, and it didn't work there. And over a 4-year period, we were able to kick him out of office. Again, while we were there, we were able to stop school closures, stop cuts to schools. We were also able, here in Sacramento, we've also been able to save after-school programs. And right now, as we speak, like I said, I helped organize some parents that are currently sitting in the district office until this contract is finalized because they want to get our kids back to schools. Like I said, at least at the austerity agenda of cut has meant now that we just don't have enough teachers, substitutes, support staff, aides, nurses, social workers, psychologists, bus drivers. So my son was constantly being moved into other classes. Instead of being in his 5th grade class, he'd be moved to sit in a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 6th grade class because there weren't enough teachers and subs. During COVID and in my district, we were having kids herded into auditoriums because there just wasn't enough staff to support them. And right now, every day, right now in Sac City Unified, 3,000 students a day are going without a permanent teacher, and 571 are still waiting to be enrolled in independent study and have yet to have even a single day of instructions. In terms of I've been a longtime activist. I helped, I collected signatures for the recent Prop 15. I also helped work to pass Prop 30 and Prop 55, which increased money for students at the statewide level. And my 15 minutes of fame was when I was a law student at UC Berkeley. I was the first student to ever successfully sue my own school. And the name of the case was Kashmiri versus Regents. And over a 7-year time period, we won $60 million of fees back to students, which were illegally charged. So I know how to use the levers of the law to fight for change, but I know that's not enough. The key is we need to make sure we have folks on the board that are willing to do what's necessary to provide the education our kids need.
Absolutely. Rocio, and your biggest accomplishments?
Well, I'm going to focus on recent because it ties in with what's going on right now. So working for Jackie Goldberg as a research and policy deputy, we were able to fight off. I'm going to focus on three important things. The first one, when we first started in 2019, the district was going to implement what's called a student performance framework. And what this was going to be was they were going to rate our schools. So our schools are going to be rated from 1 to whatever. And so we stopped it because we said, we're not going to Yelp our schools. We're not going to rate them as if they were, a restaurant, right? So we stopped it. So that didn't pass. The next thing we did was implement fully AB 1505, which was to provide more authorization of charter schools and to really look at the performance of charter schools. So the state was able to provide tiers, so the high performing, middle performing, and low performing. And part of that is we really, the district and Jackie and all we were doing, which is changing public policy, we were able to make sure that the community had a say with new charter schools or any changes, that the community had to be informed and it had to be part of the process and they had to have a voice. So we started implementing that, and there's still more work we have to do because charter schools will do anything to bypass policy and to do just what they feel they can do, right? Open a school without any material revisions, without any community impact statements. And so we put a stop to that and we say, no, we need to hear the community. So that's one thing, strict enforcement of AB 1505. The latest thing we did is we stopped student-centered funding. Student-centered funding is a policy that has been widely advocated for by ALEC. Right, ALEC is a group of, it's a lobbying, totally conservative, right wing, wanting to change. So we stopped student-centered funding, which was going to be a gateway for a voucher program, which was going to is a way of changing the funding system to, instead of going to the school, it was going to go just centered to the student. So wherever the student was going to go, that's where the money was going to be. That's voucher. That's a gateway to voucher. We stopped it. And I want to continue working on stopping all measures in privatizing our schools.
Yeah, that's great. ALEC stands for the American Legislative Exchange Council, and they're funded by like the top 100 corporations of America. Some corporations left because there was a huge campaign against ALEC about 10 years ago, and they were able to get some corporations to leave. But I can hear by your answer that they're still up to no good. I will say that between the time I first became aware of the insidious influence of charters, which was back in 2013, when we were able to stop a co-location at Venice High School, and between that time and when I left California at the end of 2020, it looked like we had made a lot of progress, at least in the area of getting the impression by the general public of charter schools to be from a benign influence to being a more malevolent influence. And as a result of that, a lot of politicians came around to our side. And some of the more egregious things we were able to stop. I remember being up there in Sacramento and seeing you in the hallway, Mike. I forget what the bills were, but why don't you talk about now your biggest accomplishments that you're most proud of?
Thank you, and let me just say, after hearing everyone else, go Bears! A lot of Cal in the house here today. And so one of the things I was proud of over the last few years was really my involvement with helping to get Assembly Bill 1505 passed, which for us was a very big deal because it really does, for the first time, bring more local control to the decisions around if a charter should be granted or renewed. I think my biggest accomplishment really was getting elected, and getting elected explicitly on a platform that called for ending school closures and financial mismanagement. And then with that platform, I was able to get endorsed by a wide range of people and organizations, from the Democratic Party to DSA to the Green Party, Even State Superintendent Tony Thurmond endorsed me. And when they endorsed me, they were also endorsing my platform of ending school closures. And what we've been able to do in Oakland over the 10 years is, through a lot of organizing by a lot of people, is really turn the city. And so now in Oakland, like you just mentioned, Lauren, there is not the same support for charter schools that there once was. We just now had a rebirth of an issue of school closures where 5 school board directors are trying to close schools at the end of this year. And there has been instant and constant pushback by the community. We even have the city council and the county board of education weighing in against school closures. And I think it's important, especially for people around the country, to understand what we've been able to do in Oakland. We have 7 school board directors that are democratically elected in Oakland. In 2020, the 4 incumbents chose not to run for re-election. We drove them out of office. And that's when I came in as one of the 4 new school board directors. This year, the last 3 incumbents are not running for re-election, which means over one election cycle, we will have forced out all 7 school board directors, largely because they have become very unpopular and in some places hated because of their policies of trying to close schools and bending over backwards for charter schools. So we are very close in Oakland to finally routing these folks out of here after 20 years, which will then allow us to really chart a new vision going forward. And I really want to, my pitch to everyone is get involved in your local elections. If a city like Oakland, which it has been ground zero for privatization on the West Coast, can really turn the cycle and turn them out in one election cycle, there's really hope for any city to be able to do that.
Great. Now I'm going to ask you what your main platform issues are. What are the 3 things that are most important to you that you want to accomplish if elected, and how are you going to do it? Mo, I gather from your answers that you need more teachers and more subs, but maybe you can tell us if there's anything else, and what specifically you plan to do to accomplish that once elected.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So the 3 main things I want to do is mainly fight for, number 1, fight for the revenue that we need to transform our schools, to support our teachers, staff, and students. Especially after COVID, we need more adults in the schools. We need more wraparound services. We need to have access to music, sports, and extracurricular activities that aren't happening right now. So yes, we need competitive living wages and good benefits to recruit and retain the best staff. And we want those jobs we want the schools to provide good jobs for the community. Specifically, I think we can do that by fighting for more money at the federal level in terms of fully funding special education. 2, I think we should be pushing and organizing at the state level to make the COVID funding that we've gotten permanent instead of one-time funding, which would be a dramatic change. And 3rd, we actually have new options, because in Fresno, we passed Prop P a while back. It was a parks measure, and we lost it because it was only 55% voted yes, and generally you needed 2/3. We were able to win a lawsuit over time that says that now we can raise revenues by 50% if we do it by petition. Now, while school boards can't necessarily do petitions, they don't have legal authority, counties could, cities could. And so this opens up a whole new way of getting funding. I know in Sacramento, our last parcel tax failed by 0.5% because we got 65%. But if we can do it through a petition, and we would have enough to pass that measure immediately. And so I think that's a game changer that most people aren't even aware of. And it's one of the reasons I'm running for the county board as well. My second main focus is going to be focusing on collaboration instead of conflict. I think here in Sacramento, we're experiencing day 8 of a strike. And what I hear behind that is that teachers feel like they're not included in decision making. They don't have any agency. They can't impact their working conditions. And what I want to do is make it so that as a county, we're focusing on listening to the voices of the people doing the work, listening to admin, parents, and students, and making sure that the people who actually know the names of the students have a voice on the job. And 3rd, I want to make sure that our schools are safe, healthy, and environmentally friendly. We've only got 8 years left to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And at least in my district, we don't have solar panels. We don't have electric schools. We have no plan to get our schools to carbon free by 2030. My son is an 11-year-old. He's terrified about climate change. And it really scares me. And I feel like really those public schools, they're the heart of our communities. They're the long-term economic drivers of our growth. And so we have to fight for them. And education is a human right. And I know that better schools are worth the fight.
Awesome. Rocio, you're up.
Well, I am in full agreement with Mo. And I just want to explain the reason I'm in my car. I had my campaign lunch today, just finished, and I just wanted to, that's why I'm in my car. Yeah, but I'm right there with Mo. What I'm fighting for is making sure, like Mo said, that the billions of dollars that we're getting continue from now on, because this is the money that our public schools and our educators have been needing for decades, since the disinvestment in our schools, particularly since Prop 13 in 1978, when they passed, that really changed the trajectory of our public schools. So I'm fighting for funding. I'm fighting to make sure that our schools are fully staffed. That means that they have counselors, mental health practitioners, they have nurses every day, and that they have the funding for supervisors, everything that our schools need. It has to be there. It cannot be a choice of having to say, well, maybe I need a librarian or maybe I don't. No, it should not be a choice. It should be a given. So I'm going to fight. I'm going to create coalitions. We're going to go to Sacramento. We're going to our elected officials, and I'm bringing the people with me, because they have to hear from us. They have to hear real stories about how this money is so much needed and it needs to be permanent. And I'm also going to be fighting for community schooling. Community schools model is what our schools need. They need to be the hubs of our communities, particularly more so now. We've learned this since COVID. Our schools provided devices. They provided hotspots. We gave food, and the district came and they provided that. And we have to make sure that infrastructure is there, but it has to be connected to our schools. Our families need housing information. Our families need immigration resources. They need so much. Our students need mental health. They need health care. Our schools have to have the resources to provide it for them. It's like, look, I have the information. I have the number. We need social case workers who can follow up with our families and finding out that they're actually getting that, right? That has to happen in our schools. So community schools is something I'm going to be fighting for. We need more money for community schools. We need money for those coordinators. The third thing is charter school accountability and transparency. There has been way too much deregulation. They don't want to be they don't want to disclose their information, their enrollment, the board of directors are the elections for them. Is it really democratic? So I want to make sure that they're transparent and that they're actually treating, taking the equal share of all students, particularly special education students. They continue to be counseled out right before testing. They say, oh, sorry, we don't have the services. No, if you say you're a public school, you have to serve our students. If not, then there has to be some repercussions. I want to stop co-locations. Co-locations has been devastating our communities. It's very divisive, and it has to stop. And I know people are saying, oh, that you need to, it's going to be really hard. Well, you know what? Hard is not something I scare about. I take on that challenge to change co-locations and making sure our students are getting those resources and not being taken away by the charter school industry. So those are the three things. And I echo the same thing that Mo was saying. We need to green our schools. We need to, make sure there's environmental justice and we have healthy schools that our students can thrive in.
Great. And to that point about co-locations, I'd love to quote Nelson Mandela, who Nina Turner quotes so often, everything seems impossible until it is done. How about you, Mike?
Well, on that thread, one of the things, I have a little bit of an advantage now, having been on the school board for a little over a year. So some things that I wasn't sure of before, or that I hoped or thought maybe, I can now say with certainty. And so, when it comes to charter schools, since I've been on the school board, both the number of charter schools and charter school enrollment in Oakland is down by roughly 10%. Last year, we made no Prop 39 offers. And this year, there was one that was approved that we're still going to be fighting. And so I know just my presence on the board and how I came into office has already impacted the conditions here in Oakland. And so my platform is much the same as we already heard. Authentic community engagement with collective decision making, sustainable community schools. I want to end school closures once and for all. And the real big point for me now is to end the financial mismanagement. Here in OUSD, yes, we need more resources. We can always use more funding. But the problem that we've had more than anything else, as we've seen funding greatly increase to OUSD, we haven't seen that translate our school sites. And we still have a lot of work to do in reprioritizing the budget, cutting out the consultants and outside contracts, and really making it where our number one priority, both in funding and in policy, is what's happening at our school sites. And so in OUSD last year, we had a almost $50 million yearly budget surplus. We have over $50 million in our reserves. We are in the best financial position that we've been in a very long time, but we're not using those resources to maximize the educational outcomes at our school sites. And that's the work that we still need to do. We still need to root out 20 years worth of failed policies that started in Oakland with the state takeover of our school district in 2003. And that's the work that really we're looking to continue. And hopefully I will have a couple of more friendly school board directors with me on the school board. And we're excited now that we've been able to stop some of these bad policies from the past. We're really excited to enter into a visioning process and really build our district going forward.
I want to ask you a question about an issue that's gotten a lot of national attention, and it's especially prevalent here in North Carolina, which is a purple state. You know, we have a Democratic governor, but the legislature is Republican. And that is this issue of critical race theory that the Republicans think they're going to use to ride to, victory in the midterms. Everybody knows that critical race theory is not taught until the college, if not the graduate school level, and yet they're making a big deal about it. I'm wondering in your Democratic majority cities if it's been an issue. In particular, they're training people to go to school board meetings and talk about these things. It happened during the pandemic. They were also against the mask mandates. I'm wondering if that's been a thing in California, in your cities, or maybe even in some of the rural counties that are nearby. Whoever wants to ask.
I'll jump in first. Well, thankfully, I live in Oakland, California, birthplace of the Black Panthers. And so I have not heard anyone bring that up. That's not who would come to our school board meetings. You know, for us in Oakland, we're about 8% of our students in our school district are white. Over 80% of our students are on free and reduced lunches. Those are not the issues that would ever be an issue here in Oakland. What we're still working on is how to really teach and implement ethnic studies through all grade levels, to really have culturally relevant curriculum, to really have a teaching force that is reflective of the students and the communities that they're working with. And so again, those red herrings, thankfully, I don't have to deal with here in Oakland. But what we have had to deal with is some of the backlash from some of the discussions around COVID and masks and those things. And although we haven't had quite the same kind of protest and backlash, that energy and that confusion has really made those issues harder for us here. But in Oakland, and I would even argue in most of the Bay Area here in Northern California, there are not people bringing up critical race theory, especially at local school board meetings.
And you two would concur? Mo?
Yeah, I'll just say really quickly, yes. And I think maybe there's been one or two calls at one of our board meetings but it hasn't been as aggressive as the anti-vaxxers or the ones who are opposing to the masking. And but no, in our district, LAUSD is looking at ethnic studies. We're looking at culturally relevant education. We're looking at Black student achievement, Indigenous education. So we are very focused on culturally relevant, but we haven't really received a lot of backlash on critical race theory.
You got to unmute.
Yeah, I just wanted to just agree with everything they said. It's not really an issue directly in our district because we have such a high low-income foster youth English language learner populations that it's not really anything that happens. But it's in the surrounding Sacramento County where things are more red. It is an issue. We had a teacher get fired because the Proud Boys said he was teaching critical race theory and different things. So it is an issue in the more redder areas. I think our fight at Sacramento City Unified is we've still got a lot of race issues we've never dealt with. We have really high rates of suspensions for Black students, and that's not okay, and we haven't figured out how to deal with it. We have implemented ethnic studies as a high school graduation requirement, but we're still struggling to implement real anti-racist and anti-bias training for all staff. That's something that's not there yet. It's just it's perfunctory currently. So we've gotten a little bit of movement on it, but it's definitely not where we need to be. And I know at Sacramento schools, there's been a lot of racial incidents, which means there's a lot of trauma that I think and a lot of issues we've never really tried to address at the scale that it's needed.
You know, I've got some more prepared questions, but I see a question from a viewer here who's also a candidate for school board in Pasadena, California. And I want to put it on the screen to see who wants to answer this question, because I think it's a really good question. I'm running for school board in Pasadena, first time running for any office. One of the roadblocks I'm facing is running against an infrastructure that supports the status quo. In Pasadena, for example, only 1 of 2 kids goes to public schools. What do you do to engage families back and invested in public education? That's just a great question. Who wants to go?
Well, for me in my campaign, my campaign is about educating everyone. Educating parents, community members, educating them about what's going on in public education. And why does it matter? It matters because public education is the foundation of our democracy, right? It's a great equalizer. So I say, what happens if this public good, the public funds, lay in the hands of private investors or the privatizers? What's going to happen then? What's going to happen to our democracy? What's happening now with the billions, with the billionaires, right? The 1% and the 99%, they have all of the money. So if we allow a public education to go in the hands of private hands, that's the end of our democracy. Yeah. We need to support our marginalized communities, our immigrant community, our LGBTQ+, our foster youth, our unhoused. We have to be there for them, and privatization is not going to be there for them. So I tell them, you need to, even if you don't have children, the reality of losing public education is going to be a travesty, and we need to stop it now. And I also say, take a look at what's going on in New Orleans. Take a look at what's going on in Chicago. What's happening there? I do not want what's happening in New Orleans to be happening in LA, to be ground zero for privatization and these neoliberal reforms. So that's what I'm saying. If you care for democracy, then you need to care for public education.
Yes, and it's interesting because what happened in New Orleans is a classic example of shock doctrine. You know, Naomi Klein's book. They took advantage of Hurricane Katrina and used it to shut all the public schools, and private charter schools opened up. But guess where they didn't reopen a charter school? In the lower 9th Ward, which is the poorest district in New Orleans. So that district didn't even have a school. And one of the things that I used to tell parents is that, you know, if you look at all the meta-analyses, and Julian Vasquez-Heilig, who I know, he's up at Sacramento. Well, I don't know where he is right now, but he's
University of Kentucky.
Oh, he's in Kentucky now.
MENA education, yes.
Yeah, he's a great education scholar, and he did a lot of analysis, and he showed that charter schools don't even outperform public schools. Even when you account for what you were talking about, Rocio, which is called creaming, when they cream out the English language learners, they cream out the special ed students, they cream out the behavioral problems. Even after doing that, they still don't outperform public schools. And you'll notice that, as Diane Ravitch always says, the real problem is not public education, it's poverty, because the public schools are doing fine in Beverly Hills and in San Marino and in, Palos Verdes. It's just in the poor schools. So anyway, does anyone else want to answer our viewer's question?
Yeah, just real quickly on that, Oakland, now we're fighting really hard to fall back below LA, but Oakland has had the highest rate of charter schools in California for 15 years now. And actually, the district that I represent, there are more students in charter schools in my district than there are in public schools. And for a long time, I was known as the anti-charter guy. I will explicitly, every chance that I get, tell folks that charter schools are not public schools. And so I think it's important, though, if for candidates to really move beyond that. I mean, let's be real for a minute. Most of the people who will be voting in the elections do not have children who are attending schools at all, let alone in the public schools. Voters skew towards older property owners, and that is not how most of the populations in our public schools skew, especially in major cities. And so what I really recommend for everyone is I think a lot of this is for us as candidates. I really believe that the issues that I talk about are mainstream issues. I really believe that fiscal conservatives would agree with me just as likely as a progressive, because we're talking about maximizing and prioritizing our public resources to serve this public good. And so I think it's really important that if you're going to be a candidate, that you got to jump in with both feet. You get your voter list. You see who the likely voters are. You can't shy away from any of the voters, but especially not the likely voters. And I really think my other just 2 cents on that, I will go to any endorsement meeting, even for the groups that are not well liked, that I know do not like me, that are charter advocates, because I know every time I walk in the room, I can pick off a couple of them as voters. And that's really, at least for me here in Oakland, that's the kind of representation I've been looking for and I try to provide. Is if we are going to be leaders for our communities, we need to be willing to step out and lead around these issues.
Okay, I want to go to a prepared question that I had about COVID, because, we're coming out of this pandemic, hopefully, after 2 years. And you read a lot about the teachers, especially in Los Angeles, who were very, very good. The teachers union is extremely strong in Los Angeles, and they were very, very good about staying out of the school, out of the classroom, and doing virtual learning. And I totally get that, and I totally support them for that. Also understanding that kids can go, and even though they're not as affected, which they actually are, but we won't discuss that, kids are not as affected. They could bring it home to their parents, to their grandparents. So I get that argument. But then on the other side, you read so much about how kids really can't deal with the social isolation. It's been so horrible for their mental health. And also the academic progress. They can lose 1, maybe even 2 years because of this pandemic, because virtual learning just really isn't working. Upper middle class students would have pods, and they would get some teacher to teach them outdoors in a small group. They would pay extra for that. And so they didn't lose as much as, and we know that in all of these instances, this is all to the detriment of low-income children of color. So I'm kind of wondering, what was your guys' opinion about how your district handled COVID? What issues were you grappling with? Would you have done things differently? And what did you do, Mike, because you are on the school board there in Oakland?
So first, it was a tough issue. It is a tough issue. And for me, I was sworn on to the school board in January of 21. So the 2021 school year was already baked in by the time I was sworn in as a school board director, which was very, very frustrating because there was no plan. And even now, I would argue we don't have a plan yet for next year. We've literally been doing triage for 2 years, just kind of trying to, they say be nimble enough to move instead of having a plan where we can project forward what our needs will be and be able to shift along that plan where it's needed. And so we have done well in Oakland, much better than most people would have expected. We've done more testing than any other district besides LA. We've had masks. We've kept a safer line for when we would go back to in person. We have roughly 1,300 students in our virtual distance learning, but it's just not good enough. And even now, we are not planning for next year to be prepared. And so the real issue that we have not been able to figure out is in a school district like Oakland, like OUSD, we address equity in the schoolhouse. So that's where students get their extra services. If they need food help, if they need referrals to mental health services, all of that occurs in the schoolhouse, and it doesn't occur virtually. And so there is this real question of how sustainable is this if we don't shift everything over there? And so the other thing that we've had, just as another subtlety to the issue, in the Bay Area, we have some of the best vaccination rates in the country. And we've done fairly well here in the Bay Area. But some of the neighborhoods I represent in parts of East Oakland have had the highest rates in the whole county. And so even within our district, the experiences are so different. There's been a lot of tensions around that plan. But
you mean specifically the highest rates of COVID?
Yes, the highest rates of COVID, and actually in some other neighborhoods, the highest vaccination rates. Yeah. And so literally you can drive 3 miles in Oakland and find a high school with vaccination rates over 80%, and another school 3 miles away where it's hovering around 30%. And so those are the real, issues. And the other thing that just wasn't fair that I just need to say is schools were forced to stay open. We are the service of last resort. So all of this fell on our public education system. We're not a public health service. We can't run a testing regimen, but we did. We can't run a food distribution network, but we did. And so those are the other real stresses. And so what we're starting to see now in Oakland is because we had to cannibalize our own district to provide these unexpected services, it's really taken a toll on the core functions. And we're really starting to see folks leave the district and just be burnt out after 2 years of this. And so I see it around the whole, and then I'm gonna be quiet. I see it around the whole community. We're in this gray area now where we're not really willing to say, okay, let's put all our eggs in the basket, and this is what we're gonna build for next year. And people, even when you go into a restaurant now, some people still have their masks on. It's not really required. This uncertainty is really starting to take a toll. So we've done well, but there's only so many fingers left to put in the dike. And I'm really worried about next year and what's this going to look like, because we are not returning back to normal in the fall. Nobody's prepared for that. Yeah. And I think that's the bigger question, because there's only so much we can do for the last 2 months of school this year. Yeah. But it will be a big failure if we're still in the same situation come the fall.
Rocio?
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of what Mike said. I think that at the beginning of COVID, right when it hit, there was no plan. What are we going to do? It was just like, give them some packets and they're going to come back in 2 weeks. And then, of course, we realized they didn't come back in 2 weeks, right? It was like months after that. So I think the reason that it took so long to create those infrastructures, right? The infrastructure of providing food and the safety infrastructure took so long because, we just were never prepared for something like this to happen. Like our schools did not have the resources. The district did not have that infrastructure that connects to our schools. But however, because of that, yes, the district was able to implement and grab and go food, and we provided food for everyone. And that was our major concern. There weren't any food. We need to feed our kids. And then after that was infrastructure of a COVID vaccinations, and also vaccines after that. But what I think was really a weakness is really getting to those communities that have those where the essential workers were living, right? Where there are low socioeconomic families, the ones that had to work every day, they had no choice. So I think there were no really big supports in providing help for those essential workers. Everybody was just trying to figure everything out. And I do want to say that thanks to the teachers and the teacher union, that they was like, they really said we need to be safe. And that was all of our anxiety. How can we be safe? How are we going to do this? And we all work together to make that happen. And I want to say that, yes, because these past 2 years has just been on operations, on vaccinations and, quarantine, that the learning and the teaching and learning just got lost. We're just trying to get back to that. But the thing is that the same thing is like all that stress is really weighing down on everyone, on our educators, on our secretaries and everyone, our TAs, our principals. Every day they're going to school thinking, is this the day that I'm going to get COVID? Like living with that fear and that uncertainty and that stress is really affecting our mental health. And I just wish we had better mental health infrastructure if we had those practitioners, because right now, as I'm going to our schools, everyone has some kind of COVID related trauma, this isolation, and particularly our kids, our kindergartners, our first graders are so way behind because they actually stayed at home. So they're coming in and it's just right now we're doing catch up, and it just feels like we're never going to catch up. So I want to, once I'm on that board, I want to make sure that, okay, we have these infrastructures. Now let's get back to the learning of our kids. So yeah, it's been a very interesting experience, but I think we're getting to where we need to be, and it's just going to take some time. So I know Mo wants to say.
No, I want to follow up with you, Rocio, before I go to Mo. Because I really feel like even though I left I left in at the end of 2020. January 2021 is when I left, probably when you got on the board. And I have to say, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, that I was very impressed with the way Austin Butner as superintendent handled the whole situation. I remember we were very trepidatious when he came on board that he was going to be a huge privatizer. But I don't feel that any of our fears materialized with him. He turned out to be a lot better than I thought. What's your thinking on him?
No, I really want to say that Austin Butner was the right leader during the COVID, because he really got everything going. He got the information, he had the teams going. And if it wasn't for him, he was really there for that, the management and the operation of it. And I really do give him kudos for that. So I really admire for how he really took action and did what he did for the grab and goes and everything. It was really, and he really reached out to his connections and brought in, guitar lessons and all these nonprofits that were trying to do something while we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with going back to school. So yes, he did a lot of great work right there and filling in what was missing and building that up.
Okay, Mo, you were going to say.
I was just going to, for Sacramento, I think we did good in several areas, which is there was a lot of testing. We had a mask mandate early. We became a vaccine provider. There was great food distribution, and we even tried to do a vaccine mandate. The challenges were that, we did have staff. I mean, I had to talk to 2 staff families who died. We had a bus attendant and a bus driver, a bus attendant and a nutrition worker. And I have a third aide who got long COVID and can't work again. And it's devastating to hear that. And I feel like we did the right thing by shutting the schools, but we went on a little bit too long. Where Sac City failed was we didn't do a virtual academy, and we still don't have one that's adequately set up. I remember having this conversation, I think 1.5 years ago, saying we really need to focus on getting a virtual academy up and going. We failed at it. That's why we still have 571 students who don't have didn't even get into independent instruction yet, independent studies, and we have students that didn't get any of the supports that they need, right? Because for example, at Sacramento, we posted 15 psychologists, only 1 person applied, right? And we also discovered that a lot of our schools were built during the Korean War, haven't been updated, had very old ventilation, and we really need to long-term update our facilities. Here at Sacramento, we had $2.5 billion worth of need, although our last school bond was $750 million. So there's a big gap between where our schools are and where they need to be, and we've really got to tackle that.
Okay, my second to last question is on teachers' unions, because since I moved here to North Carolina, which is a right-to-work state, they have an education association, but it's not really a union, and they have no power. I mean, here in Asheville, they made recommendations for school board, and the powers that be completely ignored them. And I just see that in such stark contrast to the kind of power that UTLA has in Los Angeles. That's the union that I'm most familiar with. And they kind of run the show there, in my opinion. I'd like to ask you guys your opinion about your respective teachers' unions. If they're supporting you, I remember, Rocio, when I can't remember who it was that I was helping. Maybe it was Carl Peterson. There was a race that they just kind of gave it up to the privatizers, the charter school. They just said, you know, these people aren't strong enough. We're not going to support that. I don't think they supported a challenger to Melvoin either, Nick Melvoin in the West Side. So I want to know what your assessment is of the teachers' unions, the good and the bad. Are they supporting you? And Mike, you probably have a different opinion because you were on the other side. Now that you're in the administration, you know, sometimes the administration is at odds with the union. So maybe we'll start with you. Your opinion of the teachers' union before, and now your opinion of them.
So for at least for Oakland, you know, my mom was the first vice president of our teachers union here growing up. So I'm an OEA baby. And our teachers union, OEA, along with SEIU 1021, really for the first time raised big money for their PAC in 2020, where they raised almost $250,000. And so the roughly 80,000 they spent on my campaign did make a big difference, even though we were still greatly outspent by the billionaires.
Yeah.
I want to say two things on this. I don't want us to fall into this false dichotomy where it is charter schools and billionaires against the teachers union. That's not what I buy into at all. And I don't think that's what the teachers union would buy into either. I'm not a member of the teachers union. I've never been a member of the teachers union. And so I think I wish our teachers union was stronger here in Oakland. And I would argue I wish UTLA was stronger. They've gotten into a lot of organizing around social justice issues, which I think is great. But they're definitely not as strong on their own work conditions and their own contract issues. And so one of the tensions that I had with teachers unions for a long time when I was doing community organizing is the teachers union cannot lead the community in terms of organizing. It just won't work. What we need the teachers union and organized labor in general to do is support the organizing that's going on, because the unions have the resources that we need, but they really shouldn't be at the front of that organizing. And so one of the things I'm pushing the unions to get back to in Oakland is they don't even have regular meetings with the elected officials. They have been greatly weakened by all of these policies for 20 years too. So they need to get stronger, and it would really help me as a school board director to have a strong union. We're not quite there, but hopefully this process, like them supporting me in my election and then me winning, and actually 3 candidates that they supported won, really helped give them a boost up. But while all this has been going on, the real test for us in Oakland is going to be when we start to renegotiate or negotiate our next contract, our next collective bargaining agreement, which has been delayed for a year during COVID. So that's going to be the real test in California as we get these new resources coming in, COVID relief dollars, all of these things. This is the issue a lot of us, hopefully all 3 of us, are going to be facing over the next 2 years. We're getting more resources, but there is a balance. We need to pay our staff and our teachers much better, but we also need more resources for our schools. And how do we all come together to have that real and honest conversation as these new resources come in? And lastly, the other pitch I want to start putting out into the ether is in a city like Oakland, where the house next door to me just sold for $2 million, and it is complete insanity. It will never be affordable for teachers to live here, it looks like. And for housing especially, we need a state and a federal solution. We as a local school district can't build teacher housing. We can't give our teachers a $5,000 stipend to pay for housing, But the state or the federal government could do that through a simple bill with their tax policy. And that's the kind of other support that we really need from the state and the federal government to help us pay our teachers better, is by kicking in some of these other ways without direct payments that they could really make a better situation for our teachers here in Oakland.
Well, you know, affordable housing is a problem for everybody, all sorts of municipal workers and people in general. And the problem is there's been a real disinvestment from public housing for the last 40 years of neoliberalism. What we really need is social housing. And if you want to learn about that, you know, you can go to Jacobin magazine. They've done many, many articles on social housing. And it was supposed to be in the Build Back Better. There was something like $40 billion for that. But of course, we know President Manchin stopped that from happening.
And let me just, I feel like that was a little too negative. So let me just throw in one extra positive thing. It's been really nice to see how the teachers, especially in Oakland, have been doing heroic service during the pandemic. You know, many of them didn't want to be back in the classrooms when they were first asked to go back in the classrooms, but they were there. And they weren't only risking their own lives, they were literally risking their whole family's lives also. And they did this without much support, because of how they feel about their job in the communities that they work in.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to kind of gloss that over, because if our teachers would have refused to work, we would have all been in serious, serious trouble. And we owe our teachers a big thank, and not just our teachers, all of our school staff, a really big thank you. Because if they would have refused, like we saw lots of people refusing across the country, our cities would have been shut down.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the question, but maybe I'll just say it as a comment, which is that you're reading about how teachers are so disrespected now. So many people that are caregivers, whether they're caregivers to small children or caregivers to elderly parents, there's so little disrespect, and also low pay, that they're leaving the profession in droves because they do give their all. And they just get nothing but pushback from it, like they're just greedy or something. So I have nothing but respect for teachers, and I hope, you know, something turns that situation around and we start valuing these kinds of professions more. Nurses also. So you, Rocio, have you been endorsed by the union? Are they supporting your campaign?
Yes, they are. I am actually the only endorsed candidate for all the board 3 seats that are open. I'm the only one that's endorsed, and for me, it's an honor to be endorsed by teachers by UTLA. And for me, I think the real power really for me was in 2019 strike, when, you know, we have the whole city was out there in the rain for our teachers, but the goal was to really unite us into what our students needed, what our schools needed. And yes, our teachers do need better pay because they have sacrificed a lot, particularly when the recession came. They took a cut. They said yes, but with the promise that they was going to come back up, right? And it never did. And then we had the COVID and all of this. So I think that now the UTLA has a great platform. It's called Beyond Recovery platform. And we're looking at where we are now and how can we go beyond that recovery to where we need to be. And they're really focusing on a lot of the essential areas that we've been discussing today, right? Fully funded schools, green schools, charter school accountability. Also, you know, making sure that we're addressing the issues of all of our marginalized students, mental health supports. So it's a great platform that is really focusing us on what our schools need and how we can get there. And what I also love about UTLA is they have really been organizing parents. Parents are, that energy that came from the 2019 strike, it's still there. They're still organizing parents. We're still, getting them to fight co-locations and privatization. So that is one aspect that is really, really growing. And I'm really proud of that because parents, we have to be in this fight as well. So I leave it at that because I know we're going over. And I don't know if Mo wants to say anything else.
We're gonna go over because we got 3 guests this time and me, and I tend to go on. And I'm gonna make a point about this strike because I almost forgot about it. I covered it at Emerson, which was my local middle school. And I also covered the accelerated charter school, which was the only charter school where the teachers went on strike in solidarity with the public school teachers. And I made a little edited video about that. Maybe I'll post it in the comments. Anyway, Mo, have you been endorsed by your teachers union? And what is your assessment of them in Sacramento? And you're on mute.
You're muted.
I'm in the process of getting endorsed by them. I hope to get their support. Also, just for information purposes, I work currently for SEIU 10-1, which represents the classified workers. I've worked with unions for the last 16 years. It's my passion because I love seeing collective power. And we can't solve the problems that we have in our schools alone. It's only through together that we're ever going to have a shot at it. I will say that while I was at the Fresno Teachers Union as well, I used to work there, we lowered class sizes. We hired a ton more nurses. We got teachers $500 for supplies for each classroom. And I wish the unions were stronger than they are now. I think the key issue is that we still treat teaching as if it's women's work. And we've never really fully valued it. And we had that same situation in nursing about a decade ago. And what we saw happen was there was a series of nursing strikes. We drastically raised the wages for nurses. And in California, we also implemented strict nurse ratios for nurse to patients. And we can do the same thing here in schools. We need to be dramatically increasing the pay so we can recruit and retain. We need to be lowering the class size, and we need to make sure we're not losing so many people, because so many teachers come in the door and we lose them.
Yeah.
What we found in nursing is that when we raised the wages and gave them nurse to patient ratios, all of a sudden the shortage disappeared, and teachers in Nevada or in Arizona are trying to come to California to work because we have the best working conditions. And I think we've got to do the same things here. And it's not just the teachers, the classified staff are not even getting living wages. A lot of our folks are just now making over $15 an hour because of the recent state law changes, but nobody can afford to live in Sacramento at that level. And a lot of our classified workers only get 3 hours or 3.5 hours because that way the district doesn't have to pay them benefits. And it makes me sick that people can't work in the schools and not have to have a second and a third job just to get by. There's so much work that we need to be done in our schools with our kids. It's just a shame that people are having to go elsewhere just to be able to get another job to get by.
Yeah. Okay. So my closing question is to give you all a chance to talk about your campaign, how you're doing, your opponents, if they're, particularly egregious, if there's anything you want to say about why people should definitely not vote for your opponents, and how people can support you either by volunteering or donating. Let's start with you, Mike.
Thank you. So you can find me on Facebook. I'm there a lot. Our campaign stuff will not be set up until the end of this month because thankfully my election's not until November. And what's going to happen again in Oakland is what's happened the last couple of years, or a couple of election cycles. It's going to be set up where there are going to be a series of candidates in the 3 school board seats who are pro-public education, who will be endorsed by the unions and progressives. And then there will be candidates endorsed by billionaires and the charter advocacy groups. And so most likely in my race, the only people running against me will be charter folks. And that's kind of the dividing line that we have here in Oakland. And it's real easy to tell either by who is endorsing candidates or just seeing where their money's coming from or how much. And so I really encourage everyone in your own local races to really look into that and really stay away from the corporate billionaire-backed candidates who a lot of times they'll say they're agnostic on charter schools, which is very different than being pro-public schools.
Right.
And so I think it's one of the other things that's really been changing over time is there's just a lot more information out there. A lot more people are up on these issues now. And so I just really encourage everyone to look into it, because just because somebody is a Democrat, that will not tell you which way they're going to vote on these issues.
Right. Rocio.
Very, very true, Mike. Very true. So I'm sorry, what was the question? Who are
The question, just talk about how you're doing in the race. Are your opponents, giving you a real run for your money? Are they particularly egregious? Anything you want to say about them so people don't vote for them, and how people can volunteer and donate to your campaign?
Right. So I'm very honored to have been endorsed by Jackie Goldberg, board member Scott Schmerelson, board member Doc McKenna, and UTLA, Stonewall Democrats, Angelinos for Green Schools, and just really wonderful progressive East Area Progressive Democrats, Democrats for Neighborhood Action, progressive Democrats that are really there against privatization of public education. It's going well. Like I said, today was my launch of my campaign. We had close to 100 people there. It was amazing. Just wonderful people who came, who really in support of public education. Eastside Padres against privatization were there. Centro CSO from Boyle Heights. So my campaign is grassroots, is really people powered. Not taking any PAC money, not taking charter school industry, of course, not taking any of that. My opponent, there are three opponents, but the main opponent, Maria Brennan, is closely connected to the current board member, Monica Garcia, who has been a staunch advocate for charter schools and privatization, who was, rubbing elbows with Eli Broad and charter schools. She even supported a charter school that was up for denial. That the very school, the LUSD charter school division said denial, and she said yes. She voted for it.
I remember that.
And so Maria Brennan is her pretty much her BFF, and she runs an organization called Inner City Struggle, and has been funded partly by some funds by Eli Broad. And is closely connected to charter school, other charter school nonprofits, right, that cloak themselves with, social justice, but are really connected to privatizers and just connected to the whole network. So, that's why we shouldn't, because Board District 2 is saturated with charter schools, and there's not going to be any other candidate that's going to stand up and clean up the mess that it's in Board District 2. So that's why they should not vote for them, because a vote for her will be a vote for privatization. A vote for me will be people, power, voices, and it will be for our neighborhood public schools, protecting them and keeping privatizers away from a public education system. So that's why I'm running. I'm running to stop the further privatization and keeping public money, public good in the public hands.
And how can people volunteer and donate?
You can. Thank you. Dr. Rivas for schoolboard.com. That is my website. There's a donation. You can find out about who I am, my priorities, all my endorsers, people all over Board District 2. You can sign up to volunteer as well. And Facebook, I have Facebook, Dr. Rivas for School Board. Instagram, Dr. Rivas for School Board, very easy. Twitter, Dr. Rivas 2022. So I have all those social media. You can follow me and learn how I'm doing and how you can volunteer and be part of this win.
Great. Now I'm going to ask all of you to put your social media and your websites into the comments after the show ends. So when people watch this, they can then find out. And finally, last but not least, Mo Kashmiri.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be running against the city council member's wife. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be I'm an uphill candidate, and it's going to be a grassroots campaign. My opponent is the incumbent on the Sac County Office of Education, often pronounced SCOE. She's a neoliberal education supporter. Her husband pushed to change Sacramento High into a charter school. Her husband is connected to Bill Gates as an educational consultant. Again, in our district, she ran last time unopposed, so a lot of people don't know who she is. And in the Sac City Unified, which covers 90% of the territory she represents, we didn't hear from her except when the superintendent, who made over $400,000 a year, wanted a raise. So now he makes over a total compensation package of over $500,000 a year, which has dramatically inflamed the entire situation, because on top of that, he's proposing cuts to benefits and cuts to schools at that same time. And so, we need somebody who's going to be proactive, that's going to come in and try to solve problems and not inflame them further by, trying to push solutions that aren't really solutions. Again, you can donate, volunteer, and endorse me at my website. It's mo4scoe.com. Again, that's spelled mo4scoe.com. And you can find my Facebook, my Instagram, my Twitter. I'm definitely going to need support and I'm going to need donations because we know I'm going to have a well-funded opponent, and ballots hit in around 37, 38 days.
Great. Well, this was a wonderful show. You guys are so fabulous. I need you guys and all the viewers to share this show because I'm in Facebook jail and I can't post in any groups right now. So I need everybody to watch, to share it on their own Facebook page, in any groups that they're in, especially in these 3 cities. Starting in about a week, I'm going to start to interview some Asheville candidates for city council, for mayor, for state legislature. But during this week, I'm going to try to get another interview with Chris Smalls. I'm sure you all saw that Amazon had a great victory, was able to unionize this warehouse in Staten Island, wasn't even part of an established union, basically started their own independent union. And Chris Smalls, I'm honored to say that I was the first YouTube host to have him on 2 years ago after he was fired. I will actually post the link to that show in the comments as well. So hopefully I can get him again. But, you know, right now, all of a sudden, now the mainstream corporate media are interested in him. And he's in the Washington Post and the New York Times and Reuters and AP. So it was a great victory for labor. There was another Starbucks victory this week. So hopefully we're turning the tide here. And that's why we all have to keep fighting, which is how I always end my show. So thank you very much, everyone. Share the show and keep fighting.